A circle cut from a wooden bark, a tiny island holding up the dark. We put the freezing glasses on the base to keep the moisture in a single place. It started out with a uniform design, a pale and empty canvas crossing up the line. But summer ice creates a weeping tear, a drop of condensation falling clear. The liquid slides along the curving glass, the cork absorbs the freezing water drop. A willing surface underneath the top, it dries and leaves a darkened little ring. A physical recording of the songs we sing. The boundary is drawn in earthy brown, a map of all the drinks we settle down. The material takes the water from the cold, a silent operation getting brave and old. The stained coaster holding up the freezing weight. We let the circles overlap and make a map. You cannot hold the water on a polished stone. I trust the thirsty timber standing all alone. The stained coaster holding up the freezing weight. We let the circles overlap and make a map. You cannot hold the water on a polished stone. I trust the thirsty timber standing all alone. Sorrows from the street, a freezing temperature of a hard defeat. But laying down the burdens on the given space erases all the damage from the weary face. The rings are like a tree predicting all the years, a beautiful collection of the falling tears. I trace the overlapping circles with my thumb, accepting all the weather that is yet to come. Put the crystal down, watch the water slide. Let the timber drink, keep the warmth inside. The stain is an award for holding up the chill, a dedicated partner resting on the sill. I realize that demanding a spotless view is turning back the history of me and you. Love requires a surface to absorb the rain, to drink the bitter water and relieve the pain. We stained the wooden circle in 1,000 ways and engineered a shelter for the freezing days. I lift the empty glass and see the painted sign, accepting the devotion of your life and mine. The stained coaster holding up the freezing weight. Drink it up. We let the circles overlap and make a map. You cannot hold the water on a polished stone. I trust the thirsty timber standing all alone. The wood is stained, the glass is dry, we are safe. Key sitting on a leaning stair. The lever is a little rusted on the hinge, a stubborn piece of iron fighting on the fringe. You cannot write a letter with a lazy glide. You have to push the button with a sense of pride. The ribbon waits to generate the darker blue, a chemical reaction meant for me and you. The striking armor rises in a sudden arc and slams against the paper, leaving up a mark. The effort guarantees a permanent design, a deliberate intent to make the letters shine. The stiff typewriter echoing across the room. We drop the lazy habits of the modern day and put a bit of muscle in the words we say. You cannot type a promise if you fake the press. I push the sturdy button in the messy dress. The stiff typewriter echoing across the room. We drop the lazy habits of the modern day and put a bit of muscle in the words we say. You cannot type a promise if you fake the press. I push the sturdy button in the messy dress. We used to whisper feelings in a fragile tone, but easy texts evaporate without a trace. A ghost of an emotion flying into space. The letter is a mountain standing on the sheet, a testament of walking on a rugged street. Push the plastic cap, hear the metal strike, watch the ribbon fly, find the words alike. The pressure is the price of keeping love alive. I relay, I'll bring us survive. I realize that searching for an easy road is leaving all the meaning of the heart unshowed. Love requires a pressing of the inner spring to overcome the friction and allow the ring. We slammed the middle letters on the empty white and documented everything we did tonight. I read the sunken pigment on the final line, accepting the intention of your hand and mine. The stiff typewriter echoing across the room. Type it out. Drop the lazy habits of the modern day. Make it real. Put a bit of muscle in the words we say. You cannot type a promise if you fake the press. I read the sunken pigment in the messy dress. The ink is deep, the page is full. We are clear. A plastic tube sitting in a pencil case, a hollow apparatus in a quiet place. We click the silver button on the upper end, expecting the graphite to push and to defend. The tiny lid advanced and showed a point and tip. But pressing on the paper takes a steady hold, a microscopic tension that the fingers mold. The internal mechanics suffered up a break. A tiny little plastic snapped in by mistake. The clutch refuses friction on the slender core, a vital operation functioning. No, I push against the surface to create the line, but the carbon slips away and leaves the grand design. It vanishes inside the empty metal cone, leaving me to navigate the page alone. The pressure makes the anchors slide and run away, a coward retreating at the start of day. The broken clutch failing in the narrow throat. I try to draw a circle but the center drops, a miserable mechanism where the drawing stops. You cannot write a story when the base is weak. I stare at the paper feeling tired and bleak. The broken clutch failing in the narrow throat. I try to draw a circle but the center drops, a miserable mechanism where the drawing stops. You cannot write a story when the base is weak. I stare at the paper feeling tired and bleak. We acted like a fortress ready before the storm, pretending we could operate a solid form. But every time the reality applied a weight, you vanished in the background, the bride of fate. The promises retreated in the hollow shell, a slippery illusion that I know so well. The paper is immaculate and totally bare, a documentation of the things we do not share. Click the silver top, watch the carbon fall, press the paper down, lose the grip of all. The anchor is a phantom living in the gear, a devastating absence in a given year. I realize that leaning on a ruined spine is drawing out a tragedy along the line. Love requires a friction holding in the dark to brace against the tension and provide a mark. We broke the inner pillar in a selfish run and ruined all the battles before they had begun. I dropped the empty pencil in the garbage bin, accepting that the emptiness will always win. The broken clutch, failing in the narrow threaded slit. Tragic limitation on an empty bow is the grip. Try to draw a circle but the center drops. A miserable mechanism where the drawing stops. You cannot write a story when the base is weak. I leave the empty paper feeling tired and bleak. The lead is gone, but the page is blank. I am done. A woven string pulling through a leather shoe. A complicated pattern made for me and you. It started with a plastic coating on the tip. We pushed it through the eyelet in a single slide. A perfect navigation on the outer side. But dragging on the concrete tears the cap apart. A tiny amputation breaking up the heart. The plastic shell shatters and removes the guide. The tiny little threads begin to separate. A messy evolution of a bitter fate. I try to twist the ending to a pointed spear, but nothing stops the frame that is acting here. The hole is far too narrow for the bushy end. A physical rejection of a broken friend. The boundary dissolves and sends the threads astray. A failure to connect upon a given day. The frayed lace stopping at the metal ring. A disorganized disaster of a simple thing. I try to push the cotton but the fibers bend. A miserable obstacle I cannot mend. You cannot tie a knot without a guiding head. I stare at the unraveling of words we frayed lace stopping at the metal ring. A disorganized disaster of a simple thing. I try to push the cotton but the fibers bend. A miserable obstacle I cannot mend. You cannot tie a knot without a guiding head. I stare at the unraveling of words we said. We lost the common courtesy that kept us tight. A little bit of discipline to hold the light. The arguments expanded like the falling thread. A messy combination of the tears we bled. I try to force the dialogue inside the ear, but the meaning scatters in the atmosphere. The structure is refusing to align the track. A devastating confirmation turning black. Roll the cotton string, push the metal hole. Watch the fiber spread, lose the final goal. The missing piece prevents the tying of the shoe. A permanent division between me and you. I realize that forcing an unraveled seam is waking up an amateur inside a dream. Love requires a binding on the very edge to navigate the crossing of a narrow ledge. We let the structure shatter in a careless walk and ruined every capacity to simply talk. I pulled a broken string out of the leather base, accepting the division in the open space. Frayed lace stopping at the metal ring. Watch it bend, the disorganized disaster of a thing. I try to push the cotton but the fibers bend. A miserable obstacle I cannot mend. You cannot tie a knot without a guiding head. I leave the messy unraveling of words we said. The string is torn, the shoe is loose. I am walking.
A plastic shell sitting on a rubber pad.
a digital companion when the news is bad. It started with the surface of a frozen mat, a uniform dimension where the fingers sat. We clicked the little buttons in a rigid pace, navigating through a complicated space. But working every hour takes a gentle toll, a physical recording of a waking soul. The index finger rubs against the left design, erasing all the friction on the plastic line. The coding wears away and reveals a shine, a custom modification making you all mine. It fits into the palm without a single slip, a dedicated logic and a steady grip. The outer texture yields to the daily touch, a minor alteration that we value much. The one mouse glowing in the monitor light, a trusty little engine running through the night. We rubbed the stubborn boundaries to a smooth degree and built a cozy harbor meant for you and me. You cannot guide the arrow with a rigid frame. I rest my weary hand and play a better game. The one mouse glowing in the monitor light, a trusty little engine running through the night. Rubbed the stubborn boundaries to a smooth degree and built a cozy harbor meant for you and me. You cannot guide the arrow with a rigid frame. I rest my weary hand and play a better game. The modern versions advertise a better click, a laser operation acting fast and quick, but they do not possess the memory of the skin. The microscopic battles that we always win, the glossy little circles on the plastic dome, are evidence of how we built a solid home. The chemistry is written on the clicking face, a rhythm of devotion in a steady place. Push the plastic down, watch the arrow glide. Feel the custom fit, keep the truth inside. The fading is a blessing in a digital age, a physical connection on a digital page. I realize the chasing for a brand new gear is tossing out the meaning of a given year. Love requires a rubbing of the outer shield and navigate the corners of an open field. We polished up the plastic with a gentle trace and engineered a shelter in a working space. I place my weary fingers on the shiny curve, accepting all the comfort that the lovers serve. The one mouse glowing in the monitor light, click it down and click it down, no. A trusty little engine running through the night. Navigate the screen, brought the stubborn boundaries to a smooth degree and built a cozy harbor meant for you and me. You cannot guide the arrow with a rigid frame. I rest my weary hand and play a better game. The shine is real, the grip is right. We are home.
A piece of brass sitting on a metal ring, a necessary token for a vital thing. It came from the machine with the jagged edge. We pushed it in the cylinder to test the bite, a metallic interaction in the fading light. But sliding in the iron every single day begins to take the dangerous attack away. The pockets and the friction rub the corners down, a natural progression in a busy town. The points become a sequence of a path to ill. It slides into the chamber with the fluid grace and turns the heavy barrier to open space. The metal loses danger but retains the code, a gentle navigation on a winding road. A smooth key turning in the heavy door, a warning steady partner on the entrance floor. We shave the angry angles to a better twist around the brass and find a paradise. The smooth key turning in the heavy door, turning in the heavy door. Now on the entrance floor, we shaved the angry angles to a better round and found the finest harmony the lovers found. You cannot grant access with a bitter slice. I twist around the brass and find a paradise. We used to carry weapons in our spoken words, a jagged little flock of the angry birds. But rubbing on the ego makes the anger fade. The brass is looking golden with a shiny coat, a visual translation of a steady boat. It fits the hidden cylinder without a fight, releasing all the magic of the coming night. Push the metal in, feel the cylinder spin, lose the sharp defense, let the future begin. The friction was a teacher that we could not see, a master class in shaping up a better key. I realized that holding to a vicious threat is paying up a miserable, endless debt. Love requires a rounding of the inner spine to navigate the turning of a deep design. We let the passing seasons rub the danger out and opened up a harbor from the fear and doubt. I pulled the glowing metal from the open lock, accepting the reality upon the block. The smooth key turning in, let it in, a warm and steady partner on the entrance floor. We shaved the angry angles to a better round and found the finest harmony. Ooh, can I grant access with a bitter slice? I hold the rounded brass and find a paradise. The lock is turned, the teeth are smooth, we are in.
A metal coil sitting on the wooden stair, a simple little magic in the open air. It used to step in rhythm down the painted block, a mesmerizing motion like a ticking clock. We watched the silver circles making up a bridge, a flawless execution on the climbing ledge. But stretching out the tension takes a careful hand, a fragile expectation in the promised land. We pulled the silver iron past the breaking point, into panic to the center joint. The wire bent and twisted in a frantic knot, now half the coil is frozen in the messy trap. A permanent collision on the visual map. I push the upper section but it just falls flat, remaining in the misery of where it's at. The circle loses logic in the metal binds, a tragic illustration of divided minds. The Tangled Slinky freezing on the second step, a ruined little engine crying for the prep. I try to pull the iron but the kink is tight, a solid destination in the fading light. You cannot walk the staircase with a broken spine. I stare at the disaster on a ruined line. The Tangled Slinky freezing on the second step, a ruined little engine crying for the prep. I try to pull the iron but the kink is tight, a solid destination in the fading light. You cannot walk the staircase with a broken spine. I stare at the disaster on a ruined line. We used to compromise and let the tension flow, a natural direction we were meant to go. But forcing up an argument to form the base and lock the fluid motion in a single space. I try to bend the metal to the proper ring, a desperate operation on a dying thing. But iron holds the memory of the tragic bend, a twisted little chapter at the bitter end. Push the silver wire, watch the center stop, fail to take a step, let the volume drop. The kink is a disease that we cannot repair, a frozen block of iron in the empty air. I realize that forcing an infected spring is throwing out the value of a fragile thing. Love requires a flexible and equal share to navigate the drops and overcome the stare. We pulled the center limits till the logic broke, invalidated all the toxic words we spoke. I picked the broken iron from the wood wooden floor, accepting that the magic will perform no more. The Tangled Slinky freezing on the sec, let it stay. A ruined little engine crying for it. Walk away, I try to pull the iron but the kink is tight. A solid destination in the fading light. You cannot walk the staircase with a broken spine. I drop the ruined iron on a bitter line. The coil is bent, the walk is done, I am stuck.
A wooden box sitting on the corner shelf, a dedicated singer of the inner self. It used to push the vocal through a clear design. We turn a silver dial to increase the sound, but pushing up the volume takes a vital toll. A fragile paper vibrating the music soul. We fed the heavy bass into the copper wire, igniting all the circuits with the selfish fire. The sudden impact shattered up the paper cone, a devastating damage acting on its own. Now every time the frequency begins to drop, the membrane gives a crackle and the voices stop. But static interference covers up the beat. The membrane is divided and the music breaks. The blown speaker rattling in the empty room, a sonic execution bringing on the gloom. I try to play a melody to bridge the gap, but all I get is static and a broken track. You cannot hear the lyrics when the cone is torn. I listen to the distortion, feeling tired and worn. The blown speaker rattling in the empty room, a sonic execution bringing on the gloom. I try to play a melody to bridge the gap, but all I get is static and a broken track. You cannot hear the lyrics when the cone is torn. I listen to the distortion, feeling tired and worn. We are functioning to outside eyes, a shiny black exterior of cold disguise. But deep inside the cabinet the fabric bleeds, refusing to accommodate the basic needs. Whenever we attempt to push the feeling high, the conversation shatters in a broken cry. The harmony is murdered by the ragged edge, pushing every meaning off the narrow ledge. Turn the volume up, hear the paper tear, lose the vocal track, breathe the static air. The damage is a poison in the audio line. I realize it's sending an electric charge, just making all the damages perform at large. Love requires a membrane that can take the bass to replicate the emotion in given space. We push the vocal limits till the center snapped and left the communication permanently trapped. I press the power button on the outer frame, accepting all the silence of a broken game. The blown speaker rattling in the empty room, shut it down. A sonic execution bringing on the gloom. I try to play a melody to bridge the gap, but all I get is static and a broken track. You cannot hear the lyrics when the cone is torn. I leave the broken audio feeling tired and worn. The cone is dead, the song is gone, I am quiet.
A broken piece of bottle falling in the tide, a jagged edge of green with nowhere left to hide. The ocean took the fragment in a freezing swell, a dangerous beginning in a watery hell. The glass was sharp enough to cut the open skin. A toxic little danger waiting to begin. But decades in the current break the anger down. A tumbling progression miles beneath the town. The salt water and sand begin to rub the face, erasing all the danger in a steady pace. The corners lose the bite and take a curve and bend. Becoming something gentle like a loyal friend. The surface turns a frosted and inviting shade, a testament of all the sacrifices made. The ocean wears the malice from the broken frame. A different resolution in a changing game. A frosted glass resting on the sandy shore. Dangerous material that hurts no more. We tumbled in the friction of the rising tide and washed the bitter corners from the inner side. Ooh, you cannot hold a weapon if you want to heal. I rub the rounded edges and I start to feel frosted glass resting on the sandy shore. Dangerous material that hurts no more. We tumbled in the friction of the rising tide and watched the bitter corners from the inner side. You cannot hold a weapon if you want to heal. I rub the rounded edges and I start to feel. We used to fight the water with a stubborn pride, refusing to surrender to the pulling guide. But crashing on the rocks will only cause a break, a terminal reaction for a selfish sake. We let the current spin us in the ocean deep and traded up the anger for a peace to keep. The pebble is a monument of passing time, a physical progression of your heart and a mind. Roll the green stone, feel the frosted glaze. Ooze the shortcut, count the better days. The ocean was a teacher making matters right, a smooth and anchor in the fading light. I realized that holding to a cutting edge is walking on a terrifying narrow ledge. Love requires a tumbling in a heavy sea to shape a better version out of you and me. We let the water shade the pointed anger out and wash away the center of the bitter doubt. I hold a little pebble in my open hand, accepting the perfection on the morning sand. Frosted glass resting on the sandy shore. Let it roll. Dangerous material that hurts no more. We tumbled in the friction of the rising tide and washed the bitter corners from the inner side. You cannot hold a weapon if you want to heal. I hold the rounded edges and I start to feel. The edges smooth, the glass is warm. We are safe. A tiny cup of brass upon the index bone. A miniature armor sitting on a throne. We push the silver needle through the denim seam, a daily operation in a waking dream. The metal took the pressure of the pointed steel, a designated barrier to help me heal. The fabric was a stubborn and addictive fence, requiring a pushing that was quite intense. The needle slipped and aimed into the naked skin, a dangerous collision waiting to begin. But brass absorbs the impact with a hollow thud, preventing all the spilling of the vital blood. A little crater forms upon the golden dome, a physical protector of a working home. The surface gathers damage from the piercing tool, a loyal execution of a simple rule. The dented thimble standing in the line of fire, a trusted little helmet of a deep desire. We take the sharp attacks to keep the center safe, a dedicated boundary in a working space. You cannot push the
dedicated boundary in a working space. You cannot push the needle with the fragile hand. I wear the golden armor and I take a stand. Forgets the value of the guard, but I prefer the metal that is worn and scarred. The surface is a map of every single tear, record of the mending in the open air. I run my thumb across the little sunken pits, a timeline of the moments where the needle hits. You took the heavy damage to protect the core and made the torn fabric better than before. Push the silver point, feel the brass resist. Take the heavy blow, see the damage missed. The armor is a testament of pure intent, a permanent devotion where the force is spent. I realize that working with an open wound is leaving all the chapters of the story ruined. Love requires a shielding of the tender part to sew the broken pieces of a weary heart. We let the metal suffer to secure the tie and engineer a shelter underneath the sky. I slide the golden thimble on the closing seam, accepting the protection of a waking dream. The dented thimble standing in the line of fire, keep it safe. A trusted little helmet of a deep desire. Take the sharp attacks to keep the center safe. A dedicated boundary in a working space. You cannot push the needle with the fragile hand. I wear the golden armor and I take a stand. The brass is worn, the seam is strong. We are safe.
A rubber wire plugging in the lower port, a plastic line intended for a vital sort. It used to send the voltage in a steady stream. We plugged it in the socket and we walked away. A full and bright percentage at the start of the day, but pulling on the wire takes a brutal toll. A bending of the copper in the narrow hole. The rubber sheath is tearing at the joint and neck. A physical disaster on the daily deck. In the threads are snapping in the twist and bend. A miserable failure of a working friend. The battery is flashing in a warning red. A desperate conclusion to the words we said. The connection is a gamble on a broken wire. A tragic interruption of the inner fire. The frayed cable bending in an awkward pose. A desperate illusion that the lovers know. I twist the plastic trying just to find the spark. A temporary rescue when the growing dark. You cannot feed the engine with a severed vein. I hold the broken wire in a steady game. The frayed cable bending in an awkward pose. A desperate illusion that the lovers know. I twist the plastic trying just to find the spark. A temporary rescue when the growing dark. You cannot feed the engine with the severed vein. I hold the broken wire in a steady pain. I have to prop the plastic with a heavy book. A miserable angle just to steal a look. The lightning bolt appears and then it fades away. A flickering reminder of a dying day. We act like we are charging up a battery, but we are just a picture of a tragedy. The slightest little motion makes a circuit drop. A miserable cycle that will never stop. Twist the plastic and watch the icon flash. Lose the steady flow, burn the final stash. The energy is wasted on a broken line. A dark and undeniable and fatal sign. I realize that bending up a broken cord is paying for a promise we cannot afford. Love requires a channel that is looking clear to transfer all the meaning in a given year. We step the vital connection in the selfish pull and lied about the battery were meaningful. I drop the ruined wire on the bedroom floor, accepting that the voltage will arrive no more. The frayed cable bending in an awkward drop. A desperate illusion that the love at the line is the plastic trying just to find a spark. A temporary rescue in the growing dark. You cannot feed the engine with the severed vein. I drop the broken wire in a steady pain. The wire
plastic gear, holding up a white film, a manual eraser in a paper realm. We used to drag the nozzle on the ink mistake, a flawless white correction for a clean escape. The ribbon left the layer on the faulty word, a silent covering of the things we heard. But leaving it inside the drawer for a year has ruined all the chemistry developing here. The white material dried into a brittle crust, a miserable cylinder of chalk and dust. I pressed the little nozzle on the writing pad to cover up a sentence that is going bad, but dragging out the ribbon leaves a broken trail, a flaky separation of a sinking sail. The white refuses sticking to the paper sheet, a visible reminder of a sad defeat. The dried flake crumbling on the ink design. I try to hide the error but the powder falls, a miserable echo in the empty halls. You cannot mask a failure with the brittle crust. I stare at the reality in the breaking dust. The dried flake crumbling on the ink design. I try to hide the error but the powder falls, a miserable echo in the empty halls. You cannot mask a failure with the brittle crust. I stare at the reality in the breaking dust. We thought that we could cover up the past abuse, a simple little wipe and making up an excuse. But apologies are useless when the glue is dead. The ink remains visible and glowing red. The little flakes are scattering across the desk, a total complication of a simple task. We push the plastic harder but the gear is jammed, a miserable picture of the lost and damned. Press the plastic clip, watch the powder slide, fail to mask the ink, nowhere left to hide. The correction is a phantom that we cannot use, a total validation of the words we lose. I realize that trying to erase the past is relying on a material that does not last. Love requires a fixing from the very core, not a superficial layer on a wooden door. We let the healing dry into a useless sand and forced a fake correction in an empty hand. I tossed a broken roller in the plastic bin, accepting all the errors that I wallow in. The dry flake crumbling on the ink design. Won't you fight the error be to fix the line? You have the error but the powder falls, a miserable echo in the empty halls. You cannot mask a failure with a brittle crust. I stare at the reality in the breaking dust. The tape is dry. The word remains. I am tired.
A heavy circle forged in pouring heat, a chunk of iron for the daily beat. We brought it home, a gray and porous thing, a raw potential for the meals we bring. The early cooking made the dinner stick, a burning residue that made us sick. But rubbing oil upon the metal face begins to alter up the cooking space. The heat bakes down the liquid to a seal, a dark and shiny surface we can feel. The iron turns into a picture black, a permanent defense upon the track. The food begins to slide across the base, a flawless motion in a heated space. The porous metal takes the burning oil inside, a custom barrier where all the secrets hide. The black iron shining on the stove, a loyal actor in a steady groove. We burned the surface to a darker shade and built a shelter from the choices made. You cannot fry the logic on a fragile pan. I trust the heavy metal in a working plan. The black iron shining on the stove, a loyal actor in a steady groove. We burned the surface to a darker shade and built a shelter from the choices made. You cannot fry the logic on a fragile pan. I trust the heavy metal in a working plan. starts to peel and fade, a temporary promise that the factory made. But cast iron gathers strength from every fire, a physical translation of a deep desire. The spread, the bully coat, a bulletproof armor on a steady boat. We took the harsh beginnings of a bitter fight and seasoned up a vessel for the coming night. Pour the golden oil, feel the burning flame, watch the metal shift, win the lasting game. The friction builds a layer we can never break, a solid resolution for the lover's sake. I realize that hoping for an easy start is leaving out the forging of a heavy heart. Love requires a burning to secure the seal, to bake the raw emotion into something real. We let the fire cure the bitter iron round and engineer the safest harbor we have found. I turn the burner off and let the metal rest, accepting the devotion of a final test. The black iron shining on the stove, keep it pale actor in a steady groove. Never stick the surface to a darker shade, and built a shelter from the choices made. You cannot fry the logic on a fragile pan. I hold the heavy metal in a working plan. The iron cools, the seal is tight, we are safe. A pair of plastic on a metal frame, a tiny anchor for a seeing game. We bought the glasses clear and rigid tight. They pinched the nasal bridge and left a mark, but wearing them across a passing year begins to make the tension disappear. The clear material absorbs the daily sweat, a physical reminder we do not forget. The color shifts into a yellow hue, a molded cushion meant for me and you. They rest upon the face without a pain, a steady anchor in the driving rain. Plastic bends and takes the given facial curve, a loyal little partner ready just to serve. The yellow silicone sitting on the nose, a custom harbor that the wearer knows. We wore the rigid angles to a better fit, and engineered a structure that will never quit. You cannot see the picture if the glasses slide. I wear the molded plastic with the steady pride. Yellow silicone sitting on the nose, sitting on the custom harbor that the wearer knows. We wore the rigid angles to a better fit, and engineered a structure that will never fit. You cannot see the picture if the glasses slide. I wear the molded plastic with the steady pride. We used to value all the crystals shining clear, but time introduces changes in the given year. The aesthetic gives away to a solid grip, a designated stop before a fatal slip. The lenses hold the focus on the world outside, because the tiny pads refuse to ever hide. I push the metal frame against the weary bone and feel the simple truth that I am not alone. Push the glasses up, feel the custom rest, watch the vision clear past the daily test. The color is a compromise to keep the hold, a beautiful transition. Getting brave and old, I realize that clinging to a flawless look is skipping all the substance in a tragic book. Love requires a bending of the inner part to stabilize the vision of a weary heart. We let the plastic yellow in the daily sun and validated every battle we had won. I fold the metal hinges in the evening air, accepting the perfection of the things we share. The yellow silicone sitting on the nose, keep it clear. Custom harbor that the wearer knows. Hold it tight. We wore the rigid angles to a better fit, and engineered a structure that will never quit. Cannot see the picture if the glasses slide. I trust the molded plastic with the steady
plastic.
Brown paper. A brown paper bag carried from the store. A frail container, walk into the door. We stacked the groceries inside the folding square. A heavy burden in the open air. The handle strained against the rising weight. But paper has a limit to the given mass. A breaking point that we could not bypass. The tension grew along the glued and folded crease. A microscopic tearing of the inner piece. The bottom panel gave a violent ripping sound and spilled the heavy contents to the dirty ground. The structural support is shattered on the street. A devastating picture of a sad defeat. The base surrenders and the items fall away. A tragic resolution at the close of day. The torn bottom opening the massive hole. I tried to pick the pieces from the concrete floor, but the foundation is a working thing no more. You cannot haul a burden when the base is torn. I stand beside the garbage feeling tired and worn. The torn bottom opening a massive hole. I try to pick the pieces from the concrete floor, but the foundation is a working thing no more. You cannot haul a burden when the base is torn. I stand beside the garbage feeling tired and worn. We acted like the vessel was a steel vault, denying every logic and pretending no fault. But adding up the problems takes a heavy toll. The fatal mathematics running out of control. The glass jars are shattered on the paving stones. A messy conversation in the broken tones. We push the fragile limit past the warning sign and rip the vital holding of your heart and mind. With the empty top, watch the tearing spread. See the apples roll through the growing dread. The vessel is a casualty of too much strain. I realize that forcing an excessive load is walking on a treacherous and ending road. Love requires a limit to the things we bear to keep the vessel steady in the open air. We stacked the heavy damage in a paper frame and ruined all the items of a guessing game. I dropped the ruined handles in the empty bin, accepting the reality I wallow in. Opening the mass, watch it spill. I try to pick the pieces from the concrete, lose it all, but the foundation is a working thing no more. You cannot haul a burden when the base is torn. I leave the scattered pieces feeling tired and worn. The bag is ripped, the street is a mess. I am done.
Cotton sleeve wrapping around the weary heel. A knitted garment for the way we feel. We pulled it out the ankle with a stretch and bite. A snug connection holding through the night. The rubber threads were holding up the woven seam. A functional protector in a walking dream. But washing out the fabric kills a rapper's spine. A tragic ending to a good design. The tension evaporated in the heated drum. A useless logic making all the fibers numb. I put the cotton on and take a steady stride, but the material begins a downward slide. It bunches underneath the bottom of the shoe. A miserable walking meant for me and you. The grape is dead and the cotton starts to drag. A useless burden in a sinking bag. The loose elastic slipping from the ankle bone. A fatal error, leaving me alone. I pull the fabric up but it returns to drop. A frustrating that will never stop. You cannot run a distance with a sliding thread. I take the ruined garment off the heel instead. It's elastic, slipping from the ankle bone. A failure, leaving me alone. Pulls the fabric up but it returns to drop. A frustrating that will never stop. You cannot run a distance with a sliding thread. I take the ruined garment off the heel instead. Try to take a journey on a solid track, but this unraveled tension holds the progress back. I have to stop the walk in every single block. A miserable rhythm fighting with the clock. You cannot take a corner when the fabric rolls. A disconnected error in the human souls. The friction rubs a blister on the naked skin, a permanent reminder of the state we are in. Pull the cotton up, feel the tension fail. Watch the fabric slide, lose the final trail. The rubber is a ghost of what it used to be. A devastating failure on the walking sea. I realized that walking in a ruined thread is giving up the journey for a pain instead. Love requires a gripping on the outer rim to keep the cotton steady on the vital limb. We lost the holding power in a careless wash and turned the functional design to simple trash. I peel the slipping fabric from my aching feet, accepting the surrender of a cold defeat. The loose elastic, slipping from the ankle bone. Won't let it slide. A fatal error, leaving me alone. Walk away, pull the fabric up but it returns to drop. A frustrating that will never stop. You cannot run a distance with a sliding thread. I leave the ruined garment off the heel instead. The thread is loose, the walk is hard. I am done.
Paper square sitting in a wooden box, a little treasure hidden with no iron locks. It started out with the rigid and clean design. We took it out to navigate a hungry day, a set of rules to keep the bitter taste away. But making meals requires a messy kind of art, a busy kitchen acting like a beating heart. The index card absorbs a drop of golden oil, a permanent addition from the daily toil. The edges bend and take a rounded little curve, a consequence of all the dinners that we serve. The pristine white is covered in a yellow fade, a timeline of the brilliant choices we have made. The paper takes the damage from the cooking heat, a beautiful recording of a sweet repeat. The stain card resting on the marble top, a loyal guide that never dictates us to stop. We left our marks upon the center of the text, and never worry what the future carries next. You cannot cook a masterpiece without a mess. I read the faded letters in a warm confess. The stain card resting on the marble top, a loyal guide that never dictates us to stop. We left our marks upon the center of the text, and never worry what the future carries next. You cannot cook a masterpiece without a mess. I read the faded letters in a warm confess. The modern screens can offer up a glowing guide, but they do not show the history we hold inside. The fingerprint upon the corner of the page is acting like an actor on a busy stage. It shows the exact location where I hold the bass, a custom fit inside a comfortable space. The sauce and salt decorate the written font, delivering the exact flavor that I want. Touch the rigid edge, see the painted stain, read the fading word, let the flavor reign. The damage is a badge of honor we display, a physical reminder of of the everyday. I realize that hoping for a spotless white is missing all the flavor in the passing night. Love requires a spilling of the inner cup to mix the different items and to stir it up. We stain the paper with the effort of the year and engineer a recipe without a fear. I put the rugged cardboard in the wooden case, accepting the perfection of the saving grace. The stained card resting on the marble top, read it with a loyal guide that never dictates us to stop. Time will tell. We left our marks upon the center of the text and never worry what the future carries next. You cannot cook a masterpiece without a mess. I trust the faded letters in a warm confess. The card is stained, the meal is done, we are full.
A glass domain sitting on the kitchen shelf, a round container waiting for the inner self. We twisted on the cover with a heavy grip, a rigid iron fighting on the outer lip. It made a screaming friction on the opening day, a stubborn metal pushing all the grace away. But closing up the vessel over passing years begins to clear the boundaries of the early fears. The twisting motion wears the jagged iron down, a slow and steady opening across the promised land. The metal loses all the temper of the start, a flawless revolution of a weary heart. The threaded jar turning in a single spin, a custom operation letting comfort in. We ground the bit of friction to a smooth embrace and found a perfect landing in a working space. You cannot seal a vessel with a fighting lid. I twist the metal knowing what we always did. The threaded jar turning in a single spin, a custom operation letting comfort in. We ground the bit of friction to a smooth embrace and found a perfect landing in a working space. You cannot seal a vessel with a fighting lid. I twist the metal knowing what we always did. We used to grind our logic in a heavy fight, a screeching metal echoing inside. But rolling with the changes takes the edge away and leaves a shiny track to guide the coming day. The cover drops and catches on the very first try, a beautiful mechanic under an open sky. We lost the stubborn nature of the factory mold to engineer a chemistry getting brave and old. Turn the iron lid, feel the copper glide, seal the glass container, keep the air outside. The wearing of the track is a gift we share, a frictionless progression in the open air. I realize that holding to a stubborn tight is losing all the magic of the fading light. Love requires a wearing of the spinning track to navigate the turning and the coming back. We polished up the iron on a daily run and proved that all the battles are already won. I spin the metal cover with a gentle touch, accepting the connection that we love so much. The threaded jar turning in a single spin, close it up, a custom operation letting comfort in. Keep it from a bit of friction to a smooth the fighting lid, I turn the smooth rotation like we always did. The track is smooth, the glass is closed, we are fine. The glass domain. Painted mug resting on the wooden board. We poured the boiling coffee in the early dawn. A burning temperature we always leaned upon, then washed it in the freezing water of the sink. A brutal fluctuation for a heart to think. The surface looked immaculate to normal eyes, a shiny coat of armor and a sweet disguise. But ceramics do not tolerate a shift in the extreme, a microscopic fracture in the waking dream. The damage was a secret hiding in the clay, a terminal collapse upon a random day. The hidden crack, breaking from a simple touch, a devastating ending costing way too much. We cycled through the fire and the bitter ice, and paid a heavy toll upon the final price. You cannot shock a vessel and expect it whole. I stare at the destruction of a weary soul. The hidden crack, breaking from a simple touch, a devastating ending costing way too much. We cycled through the fire and the bitter ice, and paid a heavy toll upon the final price. You cannot shock a vessel and expect it whole. I stare at the destruction of a weary soul. We acted like the arguments would leave no scar, pretending we could operate a shooting star. But screaming in the evening and the morning kisses, acting like an arrow ready for a miss. The stress accumulates beneath the smiling face, a dangerous condition in a fragile place. The final word was nothing but a minor slight, but it was all it needed to destroy the light. Watch the ceramic fall, hear the snapping sound, see the pieces fly, scatter on the ground. The pressure was a monster we refused to tame, a silent infiltration of a losing game. I realized that forcing an extreme degree is tearing up the fabric of the you and me. Love requires a steady and a tempered pace to hold the boiling water in a solid space. We shocked the inner lining with a careless swing, and ruined the foundation of a fragile thing. I swept the painted fragments in the plastic bin, accepting the disaster of the state I am in. The hidden crack, breaking from a simple touch, it fall. A devastating ending costing way too much. Lose it all. We cycled through the fire and the bitter ice, and paid a heavy toll upon the final price. You cannot shock a vessel and expect it whole. I leave the scattered pieces of a weary soul. The mug is broke. The water spills, I am done.
A metal pipe hanging on a nylon string. We placed it on the porch to catch the passing breeze. It struck the wooden center with a silver ring, a beautiful performance of a fragile thing. But constant swaying takes a heavy friction toll, a slow deterioration of the tying soul. The wind is an exhaustion on a daily course. The nylon thread is rubbing on the metal edge. The fiber snaps and drops the silver to the ground, erasing all the magic of the ringing sound. The pipe is laying silent in the muddy dirt, a visual display of a permanent hurt. The string is torn and the music falls away. A dark and heavy silence at the close of day. The fallen chime resting on the dirty ground. We let the storm dictate the heavy swinging pace. You cannot make a song when the chord is dead. I stare at the meadow waiting in the garden bed. The fallen chime resting on the dirty ground. We let the storm dictate the heavy swinging pace. You cannot make a song when the chord is dead. I stare at the meadow waiting in the garden bed. We acted like the tension was a passing phase, a momentary fiction in the summer haze. But arguing is a wind that pushes very hard, leaving all the patience of a lover scarred. We swung from the logic to a wild extreme, a violent rocking of a simple waking dream. The connection was too thin to take the heavy blow and drop the conversation to the dirt below. Watch the metal drop, hear the silence grow, lose the hanging thread, let the music go. The storm destroyed the holding we refused to mend, a quiet cancellation at the bitter end. I realize that letting every wind dictate is handing all the power to a tragic fate. Love requires a shelter from the raging storm to keep the string intact and preserve the form. We hung the fragile metal in a hurricane and validated every swinging of the pain. I leave the silver pipe up on the muddy lawn, accepting that the ringing is forever gone. The fallen chime, let it stay, sing on the dirty ground. We let the storm dictate the heavy swinging pace. You cannot make a song when the chord is dead. I leave the silent metal